Okay, cool. So I'm going to wait another minute or so just for anyone else who wants to join before we kind of dig into this. But just for those of you who are here early, just as a kind of a background on why I wanted to do this workshop, um, there are a lot of things that like actual companies have learned about how to do things. But if you're a student in school, what you're probably used to is like a teacher assigns you like a due date for something, and then you just kind of do the entire project. For many of us, I think the night before, and then that's just kind of it. And when it gets into the real world, as people always say, like that doesn't really work really well. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One of which is you might end up doing the wrong sort of work. Like you might be working on a project that it turns out that no one wants. Um, a lot of times people think that they are fighting against the competitors, but in reality, they're fighting against the fact that just no one cares. You're fighting apathy. And then the other thing is like when you're working together with a bunch of people, as you add more and more people working on a project, it becomes more and more difficult to collaborate with each other. And it becomes more and more difficult to sort of like avoid stepping on each other's toes. So what I'm going to go over in this presentation is kind of like a crash course on everything that companies have learned about how to make, how to make things. And some of the things that you can use in your own projects. If you have any questions, like I said, I have the workshops chat open, so feel free to post any questions in there. And then also, if you have push to talk enabled, feel free to chime in with any questions at any point. We're really going to kind of go through a crash course, but any one of these things, there are like 1,000, unique, like sort of very small points that are going to be lost in this presentation, just because I don't want it to be like a 5-hour long presentation. No one wants that. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I know a lot about a lot of these things. And then last, just one more reminder for anyone who joins, make sure to hover over my name where it says live and then click join live stream, or you won't be able to see the screen. Cool. So there are sort of 3 questions that I'm going to ask, hypothetical questions that we can ask during this presentation. And so I'm going to go into the first hypothetical question we can ask, which is, who are you making your project for? So where a lot of companies get started is in this sort of thing. Like you have to figure out who your ideal person is. Now, for you all, if you're doing this for fun, the person that you could be making this for could just be, you could just say it's for yourself, right? It's for yourself and for people who are really closely aligned to you, like people who are very similar to you. But even then, if you want more than 1 or 2 people to use this, it's actually really helpful to even define what that means, what people like you means. And so the way that a lot of companies do this is by these things called personas. And here's what a persona looks like. So these are some examples of personas. And usually what you'll do, if you go to an actual tech company somewhere like Facebook or Microsoft or anything, any larger tech company, they'll often have like these on the wall. You can actually find them. And they'll usually have a picture of like a stock photo person that they found on the internet and a sort of like alliterative names. Like if you can see in this case, there's Brian Bus Rider, Gus Gamer, Tabitha Toddler. And then just like a few facts about them. And this is kind of like, each one of these people is kind of like a stereotypical version of some person who might use your thing. So throughout this, this workshop, we're going to be talking about, let's say we're making a mobile app that's sort of like one of those like free to play mobile apps. And maybe it's, hopefully it's at least a little bit more fun than the actual free to play mobile apps. I think a lot of those are kind of garbage. But we're going to be making a free to play mobile app of some sort. Let's say that that's what your Code Labs project is. And you want to make a free to play mobile app that people will actually want to use. So that's going to be our example. Now, who are some people who could be using a free to play mobile app? Well, in this case, we've identified 3 different types of people that could be using this. And this is something I'd encourage you to consider for your own projects as well, who could be using your project. So in this case, you have Brian Bus Rider. He's got a 2-hour-a-day commute. He's so bored. He has 230 apps on his iPhone, right? You also have Gus Gamer. He has 48-hour weekend-long gaming marathons. He's never met any of his friends in real life, and he's always looking for new ways to pwn noobs. And then we have Tabitha toddler, and her parents let her use their phones at dinner. She needs constant distraction or she annoys them, and she's probably better at gaming than her parents. Those are 3 examples of someone who could use a free-to-play mobile app. So that's kind of the first place that we want to go here with any project that most companies will go to, is just kind of thinking about who potentially could use this. And giving them names and giving them these fake photos is really helpful, because then when you're thinking through oh, should I do X or Y, right? Like, should I add this button to the home screen, or should it be an option? Should this be the default, or should that be the default? You can kind of think back to your personas and say, oh, well, how would, Brian Bus Rider think of this? What would Brian think of this? What default would Brian be most likely to like? So that's kind of why people make these things that, again, we call these personas. The other thing to keep in mind with this is that you can start out by brainstorming a lot of these, but then once you have your list of all of your people who could use your app, the other really important thing is to remove people from this, because even if everyone could use your app, you can probably find a way to like shoehorn in like your grandparents and people who've never used a phone before. Like, all of those people could theoretically use whatever app or game you're making. But that said, you can't really make an app or game for everyone. If you're making something for everyone, usually what's going to happen is that everyone might potentially like it, but no one's going to love it. And you usually want to find something that people will love. So in this case, you have to kind of think about, okay, if these are our 3 major use cases, they're all kind of incompatible, right? And so maybe you'd want to remove one of those personas and just say explicitly, I don't care about this sort of person. So if you decide that you want to make a really casual, friendly app, what you could do is you could just say, I don't care about Gus. I'm just going to remove him from my list. Or maybe you want to make a somewhat serious app, and so you decide to remove Tabitha from your personas, because she's like 5 and is probably not going to be wanting the same things as your person who has 48-hour-long gaming marathons, right? So that's kind of a thing to keep in mind with this, is as you're making your app or game, and again, this is how most tech companies do things nowadays, they'll actually kind of remove people and say, this is who I really want to focus on. And so for the rest of this workshop, what I'm going to say is we're making a free-to-play mobile app game, and what we really want to focus on is Brian, the bus rider, right? We want to focus on a game that's really friendly to casual players, that are somewhat interested in games, but maybe they're not super loyal to any one game, and they're not super, super hardcore. And by the way, the reason I chose that is just because those are the sort of people I want to make a thing for. If I really want to make a thing for something that's a serious hardcore gamer, I could just decide that I want to do that. It's kind of like, who do you want to hang out with? And just kind of like a story from my own background, I actually made an app for those of you who've used Twitter. If you've used a thing called Periscope, which is their live streaming thing. Before I started running Code Day, I actually ran a tech startup. We raised about $1 million building what basically ended up becoming Twitter Periscope. They actually copied us. They actually talked to us about buying us, and then they didn't, and then they copied us 2 years later, which is fine. We had made this app. We'd raised $1 million for this app, and it was the original target users were people who went to protests. That was kind of our main thing, people who went to protests. They were the people who were going to be streaming this live important news that was going on. And what was the problem with that? Well, it was we actually, when we started talking to them more and more, they a lot of them were conspiracy theorists, and we didn't really enjoy talking with them. So that was kind of a big problem that we made with this app that we raised quite a bit of money for. So it is important as well when you're thinking about these, figure out who you actually want to make things for. But you'll find that a lot of companies will actually have these things. They call them personas. And again, it's helpful to be explicit and just write down, this is the sort of person we're making it for, even if it's just someone like you. So that's the first step, is figure out who are you making this for, and just write that down. And again, it took me 3 or 4 minutes to make this, and you can be as specific or as vague as you need to. Okay, so the second part, and this is where we're going to go into a little bit more in depth, is now that we know who we're making our project for, we want to figure out what they want and how we give it to them. And that's 2 separate questions. What do they want, and how do they get it? So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a simple example first of all. I think many of you are probably sitting in a chair right now, right? Or on a bed or a couch or something like that. But you have some sort of support. You're not standing for. I think most people are probably watching this. What are the benefits that that chair provides to you versus what are the features? I'll give you a second to think about that because it's a vague question. But if you have any ideas on what are some benefits that the chair provides to you, feel free to drop them in the workshop's text chat right now. So I'll give you a second, or feel free to use push to talk as well. Yeah, so someone said support. Cheese, probably not a direct benefit. Comfort is a benefit. Yeah. Comfort is definitely a benefit. Give you a few more seconds. Again, feel free to drop it in the text chat if you got something. Okay, so someone is standing up. Entertainment could be a benefit, actually, yeah. Okay, so here's the thing to keep in mind with why I was asking that question in that particular way. A lot of times people will look at a chair and they'll say, oh, like the benefits that it provides is like, it has adjustable height. Or like it has wheels on it. That's a benefit, right? Well, no, it's actually not. Like no one buys a chair because they want wheels on their chair. People buy a chair because they want to do something that requires wheels, right? If you're if you have multiple computers in your room, you want wheels on your chair. If you have one computer and you live in a small room, you don't care about that because it's not a benefit you need, right? Someone in text chat posted entertainment. That's actually kind of a benefit that a chair provides. Even though the chair doesn't directly entertain you, in most cases, you probably don't have a very funny chair. Sitting down in a chair, if you're like sitting on a couch, for example, one of the benefits that provides you is like, you're getting that couch because you want to be entertained, right? And so in a sense, it is kind of providing that benefit of entertainment. And on the other hand, you wouldn't want to do anything that's distracting from it, right? So if your couch is suddenly like playing a jingle every time you move, that would be really distracting to that benefit that you wanted of entertainment. So it's important to consider this because a lot of times when people are talking about what they're going to build for their projects in technology terms, like what are you going to put in your game? This is one of the most common mistakes people make is getting tied up in features. And so I think obviously to everyone here, if I ask you, do you want to buy this chair? And you say no. And then I say, well, what if I had a cup holder? You're still going to say no, right? You don't want a chair. Like you have a chair, your chair's fine. You don't want another chair. And then I say, okay, well, what if I add a massaging feature? And I don't know, maybe some of you are interested in that, but assuming it costs like $100 or something for the chair, you're still going to say, no, I'm not going to buy that chair, right? And then I say, okay, well, what about like this also comes with like a popcorn dispenser, right? You're still probably not going to buy the chair. Like it's just not worth $100 to you. It's kind of interesting. You would probably take it for free, but like you're probably not going to spend $100 for this chair, right? It's just like that's not something that most people are willing to do because most people don't need a chair with cup holders and a popcorn dispenser and like the height is adjustable. On the other hand, like a school, for example, might want very specific things in their chair. They want it to be stackable. They want it to be lightweight. They want it to be pretty cheap. They don't want it to be too comfortable because they don't want you to fall asleep during the lecture. There are like different things people will want out of chairs, but you can't just add all of them into one chair and call it good. But when people are making, games or apps, oftentimes people think, oh, I should just add more features. And so again, I'll give you an example from my life. Right after I graduated high school, some friends and I decided we wanted to make a video game, and it was going to be like asteroids combined with Minesweeper. So like you would fly through this like asteroids field, but instead of shooting the asteroids, you had to like detect whether or not they had mines and like this whole thing. We spent some time on it, like a few months building this game, and then it wasn't very fun. And so then we just started adding things to the game, and it still wasn't very fun. It just had more things to it. Fundamentally, if you don't have something that's fun, you can't fix it by adding features. What you have to do is fix it by understanding what benefits people want, and then trying to figure out what features provide those benefits. And again, to do that, you have to kind of go back to these personas or, think of a specific person. So you have to kind of understand what your particular user wants. Again, going back to this bus rider person, maybe he the features that someone riding a bus for 2 hours every day wants are probably very different from the features that someone who plays games seriously wants. So here's one way to look at this. I don't know why the background's blue. LibreOffice does this sometimes. Here's one way to look at this. This is a common way that companies look at this, and this is something called a customer development canvas, which is a boring way of saying the left-hand side is things that are inherent to a person, and the right-hand side are features. So, and the idea is like this is a visualization of a user seeing a product. So, left-hand side, what are some things that your target user needs to do? Let's say we're doing something for like a high school or a college undergrad, right? Or a high school student specifically, because it says get into college. What are some things that person needs to do? Go to school, homework, hang out with friends, get into college, eat food. What are some desires or potential things that they might want to have to improve their life? Well, maybe they want new fun video games. Maybe they want more ways to meet more friends. What are some things that they're unhappy with right now? Well, they're tired every morning and they can't get homework done. These are all just like ideas, right? They're not necessarily related to one particular thing. You don't have to build one app that does all of these things. But the left-hand side is the things that are inherent to a person. So when you're thinking about your game, I'm not suggesting that you need to go and fill out a worksheet or anything like that, but I'm just thinking about, remember this visualization, right? What are the things that are inherent to your user? When you're thinking back to, what do we name him? Brian Bus Rider, right? What are the things that are inherent to Brian Bus Rider? What are the things that he likes? What are the things he dislikes? Boredom is probably a pretty big pain for him, right? And maybe a gain is he wants to meet more friends. On the other hand, if you're focusing on a hardcore gamer, maybe his desire is more things to become really, really good at, games that are really difficult, and he wants to meet more friends, right? His pain is that he doesn't have any friends in real life, and this is the only way he socializes. So the left-hand side, I want you to remember when you're thinking about your thing, these are the things that are inherent to a person, right? These are the things that they want. The right-hand side are where you think about your features. What are potential ways to do this, right? So what are some potential things that could provide a benefit to them? Well, one of them would be a new video game, right? What are ways to make people meet more friends? Well, multiplayer video games are one. What about something like Words with Friends? Like those sort of asynchronous multiplayer video games. That's an idea of a way to do it, right? What are some ways to relieve pain? Well, more activity is better sleep, right? So maybe we could do some sort of project that the game requires people to walk around, like a Pokemon Go style game. That could be a potential way. There've been a lot of studies that have shown that more exercise leads to better sleep. Maybe they can't get their homework done, so maybe we want to have make some sort of app or game that helps people structure their time. I don't know that we actually want to do that, but it's an idea. This is all brainstorming, right? And then we think about products. So products or projects, like what are some things that bring together some of these, but not all of these? So I selected a few of them in this case, and they're colored in blue. And those are the ones that are going to go into the product. And we're going to make Pokemon Go. You can imagine how Niantic and Nintendo came up with something like Pokemon Go, just thinking about what are some problems for, just sort of the average, like, casual gamer. What are some things they want? What are some things they hate? And what are some jobs that they do? And then what are the ways that we could fulfill those goals? Now, if you want to take this further, this is what actual companies will do. They'll do something called customer interviews, which is before they even start building something, actual companies will usually go out and talk to users and they'll ask them questions. And they don't usually ask them questions about, do you want Pokemon Go? Because that can lead to some problems. I'll talk about that in a second. But basically what they'll ask is, they'll ask questions to try to understand, do you actually want a new fun video game, right? And you might ask that something like, how often do you play video games? How often do you use video games to meet friends? How often do you find yourself lonely? That would be a question that you could understand to understand whether or not someone wants the benefit. And And then, are these really jobs that they do? Do they really have these problems on the bottom parts? Something like that. So typically, actual companies will actually go out and talk to users. Now, I'm not suggesting anyone should do that as part of Code Labs, as part of Virtual Code Day. I think that would be, boring compared to actually building software. But I just wanted to let you know that's something people actually do. In this case, you can kind of think about it in terms of you can usually imagine a theoretical person and understand what they want, what they don't want. The right-hand side is where you actually build something. And once you know that the people have these problems, your next question is test out whether or not your thing provides the solutions. So that's where you're actually starting to test it and see, does this actually provide this benefit to the user? And so you go back to the people that you talked to earlier and give them your product and say, hey, try this out. And the reason that you don't ask people whether or not they want something, this is another really common thing I see students do, is they'll just ask like, hey, do you want a new Pokemon Go game? And everyone will say, yeah. But what's the problem with that? Well, you're asking a question in such a way that no one's ever going to say no. And so, for example, I might ask you all, do you want ice cream? And unless you are lactose intolerant, you're probably going to say yeah. And so if I were to just say, do you want ice cream? And you would say yes, it'd be like, okay, great, I should open an ice cream shop. But there are a lot of other problems that aren't really being addressed there. So do you want ice cream if it's 2 hours away in the middle of nowhere? Do you want to pay $200 per cone of ice cream? Do you want meat flavored ice cream, which is the flavor I plan to sell? The answer to all of those is no, but I can really easily just ask, do you want ice cream, and get the answer yes, of course. So we never ask that. We always try to ask, what are your problems right now with ice cream? What do you wish you had more of an ice cream? What do you enjoy about ice cream? Those sort of things would be the question we actually ask. And then, once we feel like we understand the person, then we can start to try to, build our game. So again, I'm not necessarily suggesting that you should do any of this as a workshop for this. I think it'd be really boring, but remember this picture, remember this picture in your head. Because again, if you go to a tech startup or something, that is something that actual tech startups will do, is go through this sort of process to avoid wasting a bunch of time and money in something that they don't want. Okay. And now the third part of this workshop, which is the part that's, pretty important, I think, for everyone here, and this is the part that hopefully you can take the most out of, is how are you going to split up your work? And I ask it in this particular way. I don't ask it in terms of what tasks are you going to do or anything like that. I ask, how will you split up your work? Because there was a book published in the 90s, I think, called The Mythical Man Month. And basically what they found, the TLDR of this book, was that when companies were trying to release a software project, a new version of Facebook or something, and they were behind schedule, what they would do is they would hire more programmers. And what they found was the more programmers they hired, the more behind schedule it became. So the more people you had working on a project, the slower the project got done. And so the idea was you could initially, the title comes from the fact that you could initially just say, oh, this would be 10 man months. So if I hire 10 people, that's 10 man months, 10 people, it's only 1 month for 10 people, right? And it turns out that no, if you hire 10 people with a project that would take 10 months, now it's going to take 20 months. And the reason for that is it's really hard for people to work together. And so for you all, here, I think most of you have probably worked on projects by yourself. You've probably not worked on projects with a team of 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people, right? I don't think many of you have worked at something like Facebook before, not if you're doing Virtual Code Day at least. But as you start to get into these real world situations, what you find is it becomes harder and harder to actually get things done. And you'll find that by the end of Virtual Code Day, if you're not sort of paying attention to this, you might actually realize after this is over, I actually could have gotten more done if I was working by myself than if I was working with other people. And that's not really a good situation to be in, right? You want to be in a situation where more people are helping you do more things. And so what we need to do is start to pay attention to how we, as I said, split up the work. So back in the day when this was originally written, people used to do this really dumb thing that was called waterfall. The reason for it is it kind of looks vaguely like a waterfall, especially when you color it blue. The idea is you'd spend a few months writing out a document that says everything you need to do, and then you'll spend, like a few months designing it and drawing flowcharts and everything like that. And then spend a few months working on the actual software, and then you test everything, and then maybe you once it's all tested, then you go into maintenance, and you do bug fixes. And if any of you have ever bought a copy of Windows or Office or something back in maybe 2010, you might remember that people used to buy an operating system and then they'd buy a new operating system 3 years later, right? And there'd be one release of an operating system every 3 years. That's how things used to work, right? Or you'd buy Microsoft Office or Photoshop or something, and then 2 years later they'd release a new version. This is why that used to be that way. People used to do things this way. They would have these 2-year-long development cycles, and you'd end up with Microsoft Office looking exactly the same in 2000 as it did in 2010, just with 2 new features, because this is how people used to do it. It's really slow and it's really boring and terrible. And it had all of these problems where, as you added more programmers, things became slower and slower. And so here's how people do software nowadays. This is what most companies do, is this thing called build, measure, learn. And the idea is you build a really small feature, you check whether or not it did the thing you thought it would do, and then you learn from that, and you use that to decide what you're going to build next. And this probably sounds a lot like how you do development already. You, as students, you probably just build something, and you see if it works, and then you kind of go on to the next one. And yeah, that's great. That's kind of people rediscovering the joys of software programming, right? It's kind of you going back to doing it the way that people used to do it when they were in school or something like that. But you have to have a little bit more structure than this. And so usually the way people do is they try to do this every week. So every single week you try to get through one full round of this. And so what I'd encourage you during Code Labs or Virtual Code Day to try to do is to try to, through that 1 month, or sorry, through the first week, so by Friday, try to have something built, release it, and test it. So for example, if you're making a game, have some very minimal version of the game. Maybe it looks really crappy. Maybe it doesn't have all the levels you want. But by Friday or Saturday, try to have some really crappy, buggy version of your game or your app released, and just see what happens. Someone said, your screen is loading for me. The screen should be loading. I think that's correct. But if you are having any problems where you can't see the screen, make sure to hover over my name where it says live, and then click on the view stream. I think that should work. If anyone else is having problems, let me know. But I haven't heard from anyone else yet. So basically, my recommendation would be actually, try to have something done by this weekend that's really crappy. It does not have to be good, but if you want to see whether or not you have this idea for a game, see whether or not it's fun by this weekend. It doesn't have to be anything good. What is the core mechanic of your game that you want to test if it's fun or not? I'll give you an example of this from the real world as well. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of a little-known game called Fortnite. It's just some, so Fortnite started out as genuinely a really small game. I actually remember they were originally, I saw them at PAX West, and they were over in the small kind of indie game floor with people who couldn't afford to be in the main area. Because no one played it. They were just this really, really small game. And then they tried just gradually adding more and more game modes to it. And eventually they settled on this, they added this Battle Royale style mode based on the fact they saw PUBG working. And they released it initially in a month, right? They spent a month on this. And that clearly took off, right? And that's kind of the main thing that everyone knows Fortnite for nowadays. I haven't actually played it. I've talked to some of the people back in the day before they were big. I talked to some of the developers because it was just kind of a few people. And that was kind of the way they were looking at it. It was like, let's just try releasing a bunch of things. I don't even know if they have any of these other game modes anymore, because they figured out by building things really quickly and then measuring them, they figured out what works. So I've seen a few people in the chat come up with ideas for like a game where you shift perspectives or something like that. Can you by Saturday have some very minimal version of one level of the game where you shift perspectives and just try to get to a simple goal, right? I bet you could. I wanted to show you an example of this too. And another example really quickly from a video game thing is there's a game called Bastion. Let's see if I can find this video. I should have pulled it up ahead of time. Yeah, here we go. So you don't need to worry about the audio. I'll go ahead and mute this, and I'll post the link later. But this is what the game Bastion looked like. So I'll show you. This is what the game Bastion actually looks like. It's like beautiful. Yeah, someone posted Transistor. They also make a game called Transistor. And a few other games. This is what their first prototype looked like. This is one of the games that they showed off at PAX, the video game conference. Like, this does not look very good, right? I'll post that link in the chat for anyone who wants to watch it. This does not look very good. What is that? What is your version of that, right? Build that by Saturday. Even through this one time around this loop of measuring and learning, you'll probably realize really quickly, oh, some people get this part and they don't get this other part, so I need to change the way that this works. And you've just saved yourself a lot of time. The next thing that we need to consider is like, how do we actually structure breaking up work? So now we know generally how we're going to work. We're going to try to, most companies are going to try to get through this once a week. How do we actually figure out what we're going to get done in that week? Well, they break it down into two things. This is the way most companies do things. And again, you don't have to do it exactly this way, but it might be helpful because, again, this is what kind of most tech companies do, most video game companies. Anything you think of, anything that you really like, your iPhone, it's a really good chance that company is doing this. So the first thing they do is they break down things into general things they call stories. And this is what a story looks like. It usually has, not always, everyone does this their own way, but it usually has this format of as a blank, and the first blank is going to be filled in by a type of user. So again, as Brian the bus rider. As a blank, I want blank. So I want, XYZ feature so that, and then an explanation of why it's important to that person. So again, in this case, you can see as a bus rider, I want a quick drop-in mode so that I can play a game without worrying about losing my ranking or missing my stop, right? And it kind of explains to everyone on your team so that you're all on the same page of why you're building this, because unless you're going to spend an hour writing out a really, really detailed specification with like really specific bullet points or something like that, there's a really good chance that people might just misinterpret you, right? They might have something slightly different in their mind than you do. And if you're all working on the same thing, you want to have everyone on the same page. And so what everyone's kind of figured out is a good way to do that is to break things down into just understanding why people want certain features. So like, this is for every feature, you're going to have one of these user stories. And this is something that's a pretty helpful way to look at it. So as a bus rider, I want a quick drop-in mode so that I can play a game without worrying about losing my ranking or missing my stop. Now, it doesn't matter exactly how people implement any one particular thing. It's probably going to be on the right track because you all understand why this is important. So most people first break things down into these big things that they call user stories. And for your game that you're going to finish as part of Virtual Code Day, you might only have 2 or 3 user stories, if that, right? And you can also start to understand how maybe this could help you save some work that you don't really care about. So for example, a common thing is a lot of people will build like a login screen, but then try to phrase that for here. As a bus rider, I want a login screen so that I can log in. Like, has anyone ever really said, man, I really wish I could log into this game, right? Like, no one cares about that. So eventually, yes, you might need a login screen because maybe, you want social features later or something like that. But then the story is going to be like, as a user, I want social features so that I can connect with my friends. And then the login screen is just something you have to do as part of that, right? But by focusing on these, these major, goals that users have, you kind of prevent yourself from building a bunch of stuff that people don't want. And especially when you only have 2 weeks to do it, breaking it down into 2 or 3 major user stories is probably going to help prevent you building a lot of things that people don't care about, like that login screen or even like a main menu, right? Do you really need a main menu? Probably not. I can't think of many user stories that require people to have a main menu. And in fact, many games don't really have main menus anymore. So, that's something to consider is like, breaking things down into these user stories. Give it a try, see if it works for you. I would recommend having no more than 2 or 3 if you're going to try to get this done in 2 weeks. And then once you have your user story, each user story has a bunch of tasks that are inside of it. And those are like the to-do list, like checklist items. So that could be something like create a drop-in button, add a game mode to a server, write a blog post announcing the feature. All of those things could be, could be tasks. The important thing for a task is that each, task has one story that it's associated with, and each one needs to be check-offable, right? You need to know if it's done. And a common mistake I see people make is making a task that's something like learn Unity. I could never learn Unity. Like there are too many things to ever say that I've really truly learned Unity, right? But maybe if I'm building my user feature is like as a hardcore gamer, I want to be able to play with my friends so that I could beat them, right? Maybe that's my user story. Well, now I need to have networking. So maybe my task is learn about Unity networking, and then my second task is create prototype of moving a character around on with the server. Those could be my tasks, right? Those are check-offable. Like I can tell that they're done. Everyone else can agree that they're done. I'm never going to be done learning Unity. So that's the key thing to remember with tasks. So I know that's kind of a lot. We have these user stories and we have these tasks, and we're trying to do them every week in this like build, measure, learn loop. But here's what this looks like visually. It's just a bunch of sticky notes, right? And if you go to some companies, they will actually physically have on a wall sticky notes. That is literally how some companies will keep track of this. When they finish a task, they will pick up the task and move it to a section that says done. And by pick up, I mean like they'll literally pick up the sticky note and stick it somewhere else. And someone in chat called this an agile board or a Kanban board. And yeah, that's what these things are called. It came, I think, originally from Toyota. So like a lot of this methodology is actually based on things that Toyota developed for manufacturing cars that were sort of adopted by the software industry in like the early 2000s. And originally a lot of this was actually proposed by a company that was building like virtual avatars for chat. And they spent a lot of time and tens of millions of dollars building versions of the product that no one wanted. And then they, they ended up finally figuring out how to do this. And then they wrote a book about it. And a bunch of other people have written other things afterward, and their blog posts and everything else. But like, it's all relatively new, and it was all originally developed by Toyota. And so originally it's called the Kanban board, which I'm assuming is Japanese for something. If you're not physically in the same place, which I think many of you aren't, you don't need to use a physical Kanban board, though. There are lots of software tools that will do this for you. Basically, what you want is something that looks like this, right? So this is kind of how you can imagine it. This is the way I like to structure it, but there's different ways to structure it. So I like to structure it this way, where each row is a story, and then I have each column is a to-do, doing, or done. And then inside of each story row, I have a bunch of tasks that are on sticky notes, and I could just move them around. So, when I have this one story here, which maybe is, as a user, I want, as a bus rider, I want quick drop-in mode, right? That's our first story. And then I can say that there's 2 tasks here. One of them is to do, one of them is done. Pretty neat, pretty easy to see. Some people will color code these by like different people, so you can see who's assigned to what one. Some people will just initial them. There's other things some people do as well. Like some people will put down like how long they think it will take, or like they'll try to do points. So like 1 point is a small task, 5 points is a really, really large, requires lots of effort task if you don't think you're good at estimating exact time. But anyway, like this is how I like to represent it. There used to be a tool called Scrummy, SCRUMY. that did it this way. Let's SCRUMY. But they apparently just had some downtime this month, so it's like not working right now. But if it comes back up, they actually lay it out exactly like this. I find it very easy to understand. Multiple people can use it, and you literally just drag and drop sticky notes. It's pretty easy to handle. If it's ever back up, you can literally just pick a random URL, and then it'll be there. Let's see if any of these still exist. Yeah. So anyway, this is how theirs worked. If they ever come back up, I don't know. Apparently it went down a few weeks ago, but this was, I don't know. But anyway, I used to have a Scrummy board from somewhere, and you can just guess URLs to try to find it. But yeah, anyway, Scrummy is pretty neat. There are some other tools as well. Alvin in the chat was posting some ideas, Kanban boards for Kanban boards, Trello, glow boards. Trello is a really common one. It's totally free. You can kind of set it up however you want. Jira is the one that most people in the tech industry use. It costs some money. I wouldn't really recommend it for anyone here. It's very complicated and it's very configurable, but it is what most of the tech industry uses nowadays from what I've seen. Some of them do use Trello as well. There's also a thing called Notion, which is pretty neat. It also acts like a wiki, sort of. So like you can edit pages, but as one of those things, you can create task lists. Alvin in the chat, like I said, mentioned a thing called glow boards, which I haven't actually heard of, but that could be another really good one too. You could also literally just use a Google Doc, right? It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Like you could literally just use a Google Doc or like an Excel spreadsheet or like anything you want to. There's no like specific tool that you need to use for this. Like I said, people were literally using Post-it notes back in the day when we could go into offices. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. Those are the main things that we need to go through. Just to, to summarize, let's go all the way back here. Figure out who you're making this for. I'm not expecting anyone to go in any level of detail as much as like an actual professional software company would, unless you really are interested in learning about this. You'll learn this all eventually if you get an actual job in the tech industry anyway, that like you'll have to learn this all because most places use this. But figure out who you're making this for. Could just be a few bullet points about a person. Just define it, figure out what defines someone like you. Don't build it for everyone because then no one's going to love it. You can choose a really small subset of users and you can always grow from there if a bunch of people like it. But it's helpful to just figure out who you're building it for. Figure out what they want, so that left-hand side of this picture, and then figure out how to give it to them, this right-hand side of the picture. What features do they want? And then, once you've got that, break down your tasks into, into those stories. Figure out maybe 2 or 3 stories you think you can get done during virtual code day. And then figure out what tasks are needed, what things you can actually check off, what things you can check off to do it, and then just put them down somewhere. And it doesn't really matter what format you use, whatever works well for you. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how most companies nowadays do software development. And again, this is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of nuance to any of these. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to learn more about something. They won't really teach you this in school. I don't know any universities that are teaching this. But as soon as you get a job at any tech company nowadays, you need to learn at least half of this, if not all of it, depending on the size of the company. And so actually, like having some experience with it will actually be a sort of a leg up if you ever get an interview at a tech company. So with that, yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat or in the workshops channel, or feel free also to to say something in push to talk if you have push to talk on. Beads. How do you release a game? How do you get ideas for a hackathon? Okay, so those are 2 good questions. Let's go with how do you get ideas first, and then I'll talk about how would you release a game. So how do you get ideas for a hackathon? If you're not really sure what to make, you can actually kind of go about this the opposite direction. So start with a person and then go through what they care about and then come up with ideas. So let's say like who are the type of people that you really want to spend a lot of time hanging out with, right? Like who are the people that are your ideal target users who you would love, if this really took off and you get to spend a bunch of time on it, who would you enjoy talking to? That could be your first thing, right? So I'd start with there, and maybe your answer is high school students. Maybe your answer is, gamers who could be in high school, maybe not. Maybe your answer is people who are really into bird watching. I don't know. But you could start off actually by coming up with, with a persona. Then start by figuring out, what are the things that they like and what are the things that they don't like. And if you're not a member of that persona, you can actually just go and talk to them. But if you are, let's say, you're really into baking and you want to build something for people who are into baking. What are some problems that people have in baking? I don't know, like maybe it's hard to remember what you've already put in your cake. Maybe you forget sometimes. I don't know. Maybe it's hard to keep track of your recipes. What are some things that they could potentially want that are new? I don't know, maybe like some sort of smart AI assistant that gives you, it looks at your cookies and it tells you what's wrong with your cookies, right? That would be kind of a cool, neat thing, because maybe your pain is that you often make cookies and they're not quite right and you can't remember what you did wrong. So that could be one way to go about coming up with an idea for a hackathon if you don't already have one, is take it the opposite direction, figure out who you want to hang out with, figure out what problems they have, and then figure out a way to solve it. Go to that left-hand side to that right-hand side. And then all of a sudden you have an idea for a product. And by the way, again, that's how you come up with things like Fortnite or, what was the other one that I was using as an example earlier? Pokemon Go, right? You can come up with an example of Pokemon Go. So yeah, someone was asking, what are the titles of the 3 main points? So again, it's who are you making this for? What do they want? What do they care about? How do you give it to them? And then the third thing was, how are you going to split up your work? So like, what is the actual work? So those are the 3 main points. Someone else asked, how do you release a game? A lot of it is going through this thing. If you're asking technically, how do you release it? That depends on your exact, platform and whatever else. And if like you're using Unity, for example, we would talk about that in the Unity workshop that's going to be on Friday. But how do you release a game? It's kind of the same thing. You go through all these steps. Maybe you release an early beta to figure out this build, measure, learn thing, right? Maybe you release an early beta to figure out whether or not you've actually got it. You could start adding users from there, and then once you get past that point, some certain point, maybe you open it up to a beta or a release or whatever. But how do you release a game? Kind of through this process. And even things like, how would you make a website for your game? How would you market it? A lot of it goes back to understanding this stuff, right? Like understanding who your people are and what they want, and how your features provide it. And like, if you look at the text on most game websites, a lot of it will be really specifically catered toward a particular type of gamer. And it'll be very clear what benefits you're going to get from playing their game. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. If not, feel free to let me know if there's something else you wanted to know about that. Someone asked, is there a prize? I'm assuming you mean for Virtual Code Day. There are prizes. They're not anything super, super fancy, but like you'll get a bunch of swag. And you'll get a holographic laptop sticker that says you won. It doesn't say you won. I think it says like top overall or best in class or something else. You'll get some t-shirts, maybe a sweater if we still have it in your size. You'll get like a cool limited edition circuit board that lights up with the Code Day logo. And you'll get like a certificate you can put up on your wall. And actually, like, I've actually talked to a lot of people from companies who are like Code Day alumni themselves. And so I actually know like some places putting that you want a Code Day on your resume, like when you're interviewing for jobs later, is actually kind of like something some people like. Any other questions I can answer for you about any of this? Again, I know this a lot, and you don't necessarily need to do half of this during Virtual Code Day, but if you take some of the key takeaways away, I think it can help you make a much better game by the end of it, something that people really enjoy playing and something you can be really proud of. For me personally, I always thought one of the coolest things was just seeing something that I made that everyone wants to use. seeing that I made when I was in high school, I made an app that would text you whenever a new test was posted to your gradebook. And it would just send you a text message letting you know what your grade was now. And like a bunch of people, I think I had like 50 or 60 people using it in the school. That was really cool to me. It was cool to see people using it. And going through this process, even if you're going through like a really stripped down version, that's a very minimal version of it, can be a really helpful way to, to build something that actually does get 50 or 60 people using it. Someone DM'd me just asking if the categories for Virtual Code Day were going to be the same. The categories for awards for Virtual Code Day are Best in Show, which is kind of like a first overall absolute best project we've seen. There are 2 to 3 Best in Class awards, and the Best in Class awards are up to the judges depending on what classes of things get built. So usually what we'll see is a Best in Class app, Best in Class game, sometimes like a Best in Class electronics project. But if, for example, everyone built games and there was only one app, maybe we would have like Best in Class, pure silly game, Best in Class useful game or something. I don't know. So that's kind of a thing. And then there's Judges Awards, and the Judges Awards are basically whatever the judges decide they want to recognize, and those change dramatically. Basically, it's like if they saw a cool project and it didn't win an award, then they will still give it an award. That's a Judge Award. Those are usually things that those are my favorite projects personally. A lot of the time is the ones that win the Judges Awards. Anyway, so that's kind of the categories. Best in Show, 2 to 3 Best in Class, and then usually 3 to 4 Judge Awards. And those are, the specifics are going to vary depending on what people submit. Someone asked in chat, does your program have to be targeted toward the everyday user? No, in 2 ways. First of all, you don't have to use any of this for Virtual Code Day in particular. I just find it helpful if you want to build something that, if you get satisfaction from seeing people use what you make, that's a good way to do it. But you don't have to do any of this. You could build something that no one wants, or that only you want, and that'd be totally fine too. Or you could just try to do it your own way, and you build something and it turns out people do want it. That's how Minecraft was made, or Instagram, but very few products are made that way. The other way to say no to that question is you never have to build something for the everyday user if it's better targeted toward a specific type of user. And so a lot of common mistake that I see a lot of people make, even people who've raised tens of millions of dollars for a tech startup, is they'll try to build something for everyone. But usually, again, if you build something for everyone, then lots of people might kind of like it. But usually what you want is something that only a handful of people really love. Because unless you're able to spend tens of millions of dollars on marketing, usually the way most people are going to find out about your app or game is because people tell their friends about it. And so it's usually better to make a game that only a small group of people would really like. Because when you make a game that only a small group of people would really like, those people are going to tell their friends about it, and eventually it'll grow and grow. And then gradually you can start making it more and more available to the public. You can make it a little bit more approachable. And you've probably seen this if you've ever been an early adopter of something. It starts out being something that you really love, and then it just gradually gets crappier and crappier as far as you're concerned. And the reason for that is they start out building something that just you love, and then they sort of gradually make it more and more accessible to everyone. And as a result, it's no longer something that you love, it's just something that you kind of like, but more and more people use it. That's kind of the way a lot of people approach these things. I'm not necessarily saying it's right or wrong, but I am saying if you want to build something that is really going to take off right away, it's usually better to try to build something that that is not meant for the general public. It's meant for a really small group of people that are really, really going to love it. Instagram, even though they just kind of made it and it really took off the very first version, they did very explicitly design the very first version for people who are the top users of a website called Dribbable. It's a dribble, like to dribble a basketball, but with an extra B. Instagram originally launched, and I talked to Kevin Systrom, the founder, a long time ago, and he was like, yeah, we originally launched just for the top users of that website. And that was what the entire app was built around, was for the top users of that website. And it became really, really, really popular, and then it sort of expanded out from there. And this is still how apps work nowadays. So yeah, I would encourage you not to build an app for everyone. I'd encourage you to build an app for a specific number of people that are, the people who'd absolutely love it. Cool. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you all for coming. Tomorrow we have a workshop on how to build your own personal website. So if you've never done any web development before, especially, this could be a good workshop for you. It's really helpful to have something such that when you Google your name, like you have a website. It's cool, it's fun, people think you're cool for it, and also it helps you with getting a job later too. So that'll be tomorrow, I think at 5 Eastern. It might be 6 Eastern, I don't remember. We'll post it in the announcements later. And if you have any other questions, we'll also be in co-working for most of tomorrow to just drop in, ask us a question, whether it's a coding question or a code day question. Yeah, hope to see you at a future workshop. So thank you.